do something slightly different with this session and tell you kind of a big cultural story. When I arrived in St Andrews nearly 20 years ago, I inherited a module to teach for our second years called Contemporary Theology and Its Challenges. This module had been designed by Daphne Hampson, who, as you may know, was the preeminent feminist theologian in the UK for a while and described herself as post-Christian. And I think probably I taught it slightly differently to the way she had designed it, but it was that word contemporary. I do historical theology. For me, contemporary means anything after the French Revolution, really. That's not history, that's current affairs. And I want to go back to about then and tell a story from Enlightenment to postmodernity and beyond, because that's a story all about hope and the loss of hope. Let's see where we go. This is a young William Wordsworth. I chose one of the young pictures because he got rubbish as he got older. Kept editing his old poems and making them worse, stuff like that. One of his poems is The Prelude, which is kind of, the subtitle is something like The Formation of a Poet's Mind. It's kind of autobiography describing school and then studies and how he came to be who he was. And in one of the sections, I think it's book 10, talking about France and what he experienced when he went to France, having graduated from Cambridge. Oh, pleasant exercise of hope and joy, for mighty were the auxilia which then stood upon our side. Us who were strong in love, bliss it was in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Oh, times in which the meagre, stale, forbidding ways of custom, law, and statute took at once the attraction of a country and romance, when reason seemed the most to assert her rights, when most intent on making of herself a prime enchantress, to assist the work which then was going forward in her name, not favoured spots alone, but the whole earth, the beauty war of promise, that which sets, as at some moments might not be unfelt among the bowers of paradise itself, the budding rose above the rose full blown. What temper at the prospect did not wake to happiness unthought of? The inert were roused, and lively natures rapt away. He was kind of excited. That's kind of early 19th century version of a whoop. And what was he so excited about? Well, simply the Enlightenment, okay. In the middle of that, when reason seemed the most to assert her rights. What you find in the 18th century is this massive cultural moment of hope. There's the opportunity for things to be better. The world is going to improve. Why? How? Well, these two chaps have a lot to do with it. That's Isaac Newton on your left and John Locke on your right. And through the 18th century, you get endless people, philosophers, enlighteners, writing lists of the three greatest people in history. And it's always Newton, it's always Locke. And then there's some fight about the third. You pick someone French if you're French, and so on. What did they give? Well, Newton first. The excitement is in his laws of gravitation. What now? You might not find laws of gravitation very exciting. I did a physics degree before I came to this. But the point was, that you know the famous story. Left Cambridge because there was a plague and was sitting Nottinghamshire somewhere, wasn't it, in his orchard, and an apple fell on his head and he began to wonder about gravity. And then he writes down this very, very simple equation, F equals GMM over R squared. This equation describes at once the fall of the apple and the motion of the planets. And that's the excitement, that you can model things. That you can model things that seemed obscure, impossible, unknowable, and model them very, very simply with a mathematical equation. And if only we can do this for everything, then we will make sense of the world. We will understand. Just down the road from St Andrews, where I work, at a town called Kirkcaldy. If it's famous recently, it's for a very poor English sports journalist who, when Wraith Rovers, who are the team in Kirkcaldy, beat someone significantly above themselves, not realising that Wraith wasn't the name of the town, announced they'll be dancing in the streets of Wraith tonight, and earned universal and lasting derision from everyone in Scotland. Gordon Brown, of course, was MP, well, Kirkcaldy born and bred, MP for Kirkcaldy. Go back a bit, it's famous for linoleum. Go back a bit more, and it's the birthplace of Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, the foundational text of economics. Smith has been inspired by Newton. Smith thinks if only we can write down the right equations, we will understand how money flows, how wealth is generated and spread. We will end poverty. We will end want and need. We will establish prosperity everywhere. That's the possibility, that's the hope that people were finding in looking at what Newton was doing. Now, you may have noticed that didn't quite work with economics. It's not the Enlightenment's greatest failure, that's probably politics, where the great decisive political moment of the Enlightenment, well, there's the French Revolution and what flowed from there, but the American Constitution is an enlightened document from start to finish. Even the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, chief amongst which are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And self-evident. It's not something you take on trust. It's something that everybody rational can see. Equality. And so you devise a system of government that has checks and balances that will enable rational, enlightened, civilized government to prosper and grow and never be defeated. And of course, that is the history of American democracy, right up until I didn't put the date in my notes, okay. But John Locke is behind this as well. John Locke starts doing the political stuff. He does the, he writes about religious liberty. There's a bit of an argument here. Basically, Locke writes about religious liberty 3 times in his life. When he's a student in Oxford, and he's studying under the great Congregationalist theologian John Owen, who is a great champion of religious liberty, having learnt it from the Baptists. And that's just true. And Locke writes in defence of liberty at that point. Then, having graduated, he gets involved in a circle that's very close to the king and starts writing these books about how the king is in charge of everything, and everyone ought to worship the way the king tells them to. And then, you know, at the end of his life, he defends religious liberty again. And most biographers these days seem to want to claim that he actually only came to a belief in liberty late in life, and he was the student stuff, he was just writing what he thought Owen wanted to hear. I suspect that actually it was the middle period. He was just writing the stuff the king wanted to hear, and that he really was convinced by Owen, I think. Anyway, that's... But Locke does politics, Locke does liberty. Locke starts to show the way to imagine an enlightened world. What's the core here? There's Hans-Georg Gadamer, a recent philosopher, described enlightenment as a prejudice against prejudice, which is kind of gnomic but nice. What he meant by that was, at the heart of all these folk who are pushing enlightenment is this belief that everything that's gone wrong has been because we've been fed traditional lies, whether it's the French aristocracy telling us that, you know, they should be in charge, whether it's the churches telling us that they alone know the truth. And what you do in the Enlightenment, inspired by Newton, inspired by Locke, is rip all that up. Say, let's just think rationally about this stuff. And we will come to truth. Truth that all people will see cannot be questioned or denied. This is Jacques-Louis David, the painting called The Oath of the Horatii, 1786. I don't know if you've been to the Louvre in France, but there's in Paris. There's some great stuff. There's the Mona Lisa and some various other. Michelangelo's David is there, isn't it? And in between there are corridors which feel like they're about a mile long, lined with very, very ordinary French revolutionary art, most of it with female figures representing liberty or something, who seem completely unable to keep their tops on. But David is in that group, but he's better than most of them. And I don't know how much you know about pre-imperial Roman history, but one of the stories when Rome is fighting one of the other cities in Italy, Ostia was it, before the establishment of the empire, concerns a moment when they decided they would settle the battle by the three Horatii brothers, who are the three on the left here, fighting duels with three champions from Ostia. The kind of piquancy, if you so to speak, in the story, is it happens that the three Ostian champions are married to the three sisters of the Horatii brothers. But they put Rome before family. They put duty before feeling. And so they pledge that they will fight. And you can see the sisters not wildly impressed by the idea to the right there. And this is David is painting this because it's a classic piece of kind of Enlightenment propaganda, I suppose. The duty, universal reason wins, not local family loyalty. And even the painting itself, almost hyper-realistic, the muscles of the legs, the light falling, the way that the clothes fold, everything is just as it should be. We represent the world as it is. and we believe in universal truths and reason. Perhaps the greatest artistic expression of this is Mozart's Magic Flute, and here I hope we might get some. Oh, good. Oh. Give me a moment, because it's worth hearing. Is this me or you, do you think? Right. There's some more music later, which is awful, so enjoy this bit. Sound. Okay, let's try that. This is Diana Demaru singing the aria. Oh, that's exciting. Why are you doing that? Have you got a mouse in your bag again? No, I haven't got a mouse in my bag. Okay, that was a lovely bit of colorato there. So, yeah, right. I was once doing a lecture like, actually it was very like this because it was the same sort of stuff, and I'd got all sorts of pictures and bits of music that I was giving them, and managed to blow the fuse on the entire presentation system in the lecture room. And thankfully it was something I'd done a few times before, so I kind of knew where I was going. So after playing a bit and realising it just wasn't working, I invited them all to hum Mahler's Sixth Symphony, and we got on with it. But if you know the Magic Flute, I mean, a very weird story, but the Queen of the Night, although she gets some wonderful arias, is this image of tradition and obscurity, and she is to be conquered by reason and by the power of the sun. And there's lots of kind of Masonic imagery reflecting reason in there. But the closing kind of chorus, beauty and goodness have conquered the night. Beauty and goodness have conquered the night. Classic Enlightenment mythology. But the failure of Enlightenment, the picture is random cogwheels. I have a feeling that when I picked it up, it told me which random cogwheels they are, but it doesn't matter. It's trying to model everything mathematically means you paint the world as a machine. And there's a chap called Hartley, not the one who wrote the book on fly fishing, who's justly forgotten, who was an early psychologist in England, and he was trying to do a kind of enlightened account of thinking, and he theorized that if only we could see at sufficiently close detail the grey matter that makes up our brains, we'd see was impossibly tiny cogs and levers, and the whole thing was a machine. And of course, there's a problem with that, because machines are rational, but they aren't human. I have an ongoing argument with a friend of mine who's professor of physics somewhere, and also leadership in Baptist churches and so on, but about what gets called artificial intelligence. And he says, but have you seen how it can play Go? And I kind of say, well, when it can write poetry I'll be interested. Until then, it's not intelligence as I understand it. And that's a critique of Enlightenment in itself. This is Caspar David Friedrich's Winter Landscape, 1811. One of the, so this is Romanticism. This is a kind of explosion of belief in what the importance of personality, of humanity, of feeling, against the kind of cold, hard logic of the machine that was the Enlightenment. So I don't know how well you can see here, but in the tree there's a crucifix, and leaning against the rock at the bottom there's a figure with a crotch that he's dropped right in the foreground there, hands together praying, and then to the left of the tree at the back you've got this shadowy image in the mist, which is it a cathedral? Is it a fairy tale castle? Is it a set for Frozen? There is mystery and mystique, and what's painted is moving towards impressionism. In contrast to David's, hyper-realistic, every muscle will be painted biologically correct. Friedrich is the mist, and everything kind of disappears into the background, and it's, as the Impressionists would argue, it's what you actually see rather than what you think you ought to see. What led to this kind of rejection? Well, right at the heart of it, I think, was the French Revolution and the aftermath. Because the French Revolution was supposed to be the great triumph of reason. That we had Wordsworth at the start. But quickly it led to the terror, the guillotine, Napoleon declaring himself emperor, marching across Europe, trying to conquer land after land. And so this is Coleridge. I like Coleridge. In Wendy Cope, the contemporary poet, has a poem, one of her collections, that simply runs, when they ask me about my favourite poet, I'd better not mention you, though you're certainly my favourite poet. I quite like your poetry too. Addressed to her current partner, obviously. In that spirit, Coleridge is definitely my favourite poet, and some of his poetry is okay. But he, right, this is from France, an ode. Then I reproached my fears that would not flee. Soon, I said, shall wisdom teach her law in the low huts that toil and groan, and conquering by her happiness alone, shall France compel the nations to be free, till love and joy look round and call the earth their own. That's the end of the third stanza or section. And then the fourth, that hope that somehow reason would triumph finally dies. Forgive me, freedom. Forgive those dreams. I hear thy voice. I hear thy loud lament from bleak Helvetia's icy caverns sent. Napoleon marching across Switzerland. I hear thy groans upon her blood-stained streams. Heroes that for your peaceful country perished, and ye that fleeing spot your mountain snows with bleeding wounds. Forgive me that I cherished one thought that ever blessed your cruel foes. From bliss was it in that dawn to be alive. To be young was very heaven. To this, Coleridge and Wordsworth were, of course, pretty good friends. Yeah, that's a long footnote there. They share this disillusionment that what they had seen happening in France, that they thought spelt the beginning of a new and rational and enlightened human politics, fell apart so badly. And that kind of opens their eyes to the failures of the machine. And of course they become the classic romantic poets. Keeping with Coleridge, this is from Frost at Midnight, which he's writing to his son Hartley, who at this point is a baby. For I was reared in the great city, pent mid cloisters dim, and saw naught lovely but the sun and stars. But thou, my babe, shall wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain, and beneath the clouds which image in their bulk both lakes and shores and mountain crags. So shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters, who from eternity doth teach himself in all, and all things in himself. Great universal teacher, he shall mould thy spirit, and by giving make it ask. Now, this is already, and I mean this is in the lyrical ballads, this is already, in a sense, the end of Romanticism. Because Coleridge is suddenly saying, I can't do it. I don't understand. I was brought up in the city. And my soul was not educated by the beauty of the Lake District. Proper romantic, it's all about the Lake District, yeah. Or if you're in Germany, it's the Jungfrau. But if you really want to be a romantic, you have to be either on top of Helvellyn or on top of the Jungfrau at dawn with an inversion, so there's clouds beneath you, and then you stand and see your shadow spread out for about 20 miles across the clouds. That's kind of the entry ticket. But Coleridge suddenly says, I can see that it's beautiful, but I can't make any sense of it. So he says to his son Hartley, I'll bring you up, immersed in this beauty, and maybe, just maybe, you will be able to tell the truth, to speak of the world in all its spiritual wonder. But before Hartley grows up, he gives up on that. He writes his 3 demonic poems, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which begins 3 people on their way to a wedding, and this mariner stops one of them and starts telling his tale. So the whole thing is reported by one figure on a road. And endlessly the question is it true? Is all this story about the curse of the albatross and the sea snakes and the monsters and the weird weather, is it true? Or is it just the delusions of someone who got sunstroke in the tropics or was delirious because of a lack of water or whatever it may be? Christabel. Christabel, you probably don't know Christabel, it's less famous than the other two, but Christabel is a kind of knightly romance, except there's no knights involved. Particularly, it's a young woman, the Duke's daughter, and she meets this other young woman called Christabel, and invites her into the castle, and there are endless hints that Christabel is, although appearing beautiful and fair and very kind of knightly romancy or Disney, is some sort of evil spirit in disguise. But this is never quite resolved. The question what's the truth hovers and hovers. And then finally, Kubla Khan in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers was girdled round. And there were gardens bright with sinuous rills where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and there were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep, romantic chasm, which slanted down a green hill, athwart a cedarn cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as air beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift, half-intermitted burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river, 5 miles meandering with amazing motion. Through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of that dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. 'Twas an Abyssinian maid, and upon her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abor. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight would win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware his flashing eyes, his flowing hair, weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. If you've read the thing about a visitor from Porlock, it's rubbish, it's not true. Coleridge wrote it down, but it's not true. The poem is complete and is very carefully complete. And it's all about the inability of the poet to tell the truth. So we start with this long description of Xanadu. And then suddenly it breaks, and we're into this Abyssinian maid remembered from a vision. Her song, if it could be recollected, would enable the poet to build the dome in air so that anyone hearing his words would see it. But he can't remember the song. And so for all the beautiful wordplay in the poem, you can't see the dome. Coleridge pretty much stopped writing poetry for a while after that, and his only really major work was entitled Dejection, an Ode, which is a surprisingly long poem about his inability to write poetry. He turned to philosophy and theology and became the world's first and last fundamentalist Anglican, believing that the Book of Common Prayer described the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But in In Romanticism, we have the criticism of the machine, the world as machine, the assertion that there is a deeper truth of humanity, of reality, of personality. But then this collapse. Not even it's not there, but if it is there, I can't get near it. I can't show it to you. I hoped if I brought Hartley up, knowing the beauty of the world, he might be able to do this right. But no. No, we're left with Abyssinian maids in visions whose song is forgotten. We're left with the half-remembered possibility that this might be possible, but no access, no way to claim it. And what happens to all the real technological advances? They become ways of making more and more deadly and indiscriminate weapons. The First World War is this place where we see the things that Coleridge and Wordsworth were seeing in their minds written across Northern Europe. The brutality of the machine chews up, spits out, destroys life after life after life after life. Where'd you go? Culturally, there are about two places. There's decadence, the original decadent movement, Oscar Wilde. Faced with no meaning and no hope, you find some sort of life in a brittle humour. Clever quips that give you the occasional laugh. That might stave off the despair for just a little while. Perhaps there's three places you go. There's also despair. If we're doing poets, A. Houseman, Shropshire lad. Interesting history. It's published in 1897, is that right? Something like that. And completely unknown, really, until the war starts. And then suddenly Houseman's impossibly beautiful poems of despair become astonishingly popular. If you know Houseman, there's one about going out to bat in the cricket match, then keeping goal in the football match. The last line is something about how remarkable it is that how little fun will stave off suicide. Four lines. This is the land of lost content. I see it shining plain. Those happy fields where I went and cannot go again. the penultimate poem in the book. Oh, Terence, this is stupid stuff. You eat your victuals fast enough. It's nothing much amiss. 'Tis clear to see the way you drink your beer. But, oh, good Lord, the verse you make gives a chap the bellyache. The cow, the old cow, she is dead. It sleeps well, the horned head. And, young lads, 'tis our turn now to hear tunes has killed the cow. Pretty friendship this, to rhyme your friends to death before they've time. Moping, melancholy, mad, come. Pipe a tune to dance to, lad. Well, if 'tis dancing you would be, there's brisker pipes than poetry. Say for what were hop-yards meant, or why was Burton built on Trent? There's many a peer in England brews livelier liquor than the Muse, and malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man. Ale, lad, ale's the stuff to drink for fellows whom it hurts to think. Look into the pewter pot and see the world as the world's not. And faith, 'tis pleasant till 'tis past. The mischief is that 'twill not last. Oh, I've been to Ludlow Fair and left my necktie Lord knows where, and carried halfway home or near pints and quarts of Ludlow beer. Then the world seemed none so bad, and I myself a sterling lad, down in lovely muck I've lain, happy till I woke again. The world, it was the old world yet. I was I. My clothes were wet. Nothing now remains to do but begin the game ado. So it goes on. Despair. Decadence or despair or... I was trying to think of a word beginning with D, but I can't, so we'll just we'll just go with modernism, because so this is Mondrian. Apparently this painting is called Landscape. I have only given you details, so you won't see the complete landscape there. But I don't know if you know Mondrian, but he did a lot of boxes with colours in many of them. What's going on here? Well, I mean, if you know about Mondrian, there is a genuine sort of weird spirituality that underlies all this. But there is this kind of almost despairing holding on to the Enlightenment vision. Straight lines, angles, pure colours. Reason, rationality, mathematics. But the connection with the world seems to have gone. Philip Glass, the American composer, in '82 released Glassworks, 6 movements. This is, assuming it works, the second movement called Flow. No, that's not going to work. Okay. No, that's really not going to work. Okay, well, flow is horrible. It's 6 minutes long. I have never yet managed to listen to the end of it. It is a piece of mathematics in musical form. Essentially, you have a phrase that's not actually a very pretty phrase to begin with, and he then just keeps halving the length of the notes on the synthesizer, and so it gets very sort of beep, 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 and yeah. But again, an attempt to hold on to the math, regardless of the loss of beauty. "20 years ago, we were all talking about post-modernity, postmodernism. For reasons I'll talk about in a moment, we've stopped now, but the classic definition of postmodernity comes from Jean-Francois Lyotard, who says it's an incredulity towards meta-narratives. This proves two things. The first is, if you really want to make it as a postmodern philosopher, you never use a word of one syllable when a word of 5 syllables will do just as well. And the second is, meta-narrative, big story. We no longer believe, says Lyotard, any of the big stories. And that is the postmodern condition. We've stopped believing that there are ways to explain the world. Truths we can all agree on. Rational propositions that we can share. So what do we do instead? Well, the classic postmodern move is jouissance. So jouissance, a French word meaning play. And you see it in the writers. Derrida is often very, very funny if you read him in French. You don't believe me, do you? It's a story I heard from someone who'd been to hear Derrida, he said he gave the talk was split in two with some sort of comfort break in the middle, and he kept talking about cows and how he'd got to come to terms with cows. And speaking in English, says cows is the fundamental reality of our world today. We need to face up to cows, and everybody's kind of trying to work out what's going on here. And he comes out after the comfort break and says, "I'm told it is pronounced chaos." But play. I won't even try the music. But now, what do you do as a contemporary musician facing up to the horrific realities of nuclear weapons? Well, no, Simon and Garfunkel write Paul Simon writes it. A slow, pensive, lamenting song. The sun is burning. Now the sun has come to earth in a mushroom cloud of death. Twisted hunks of sightless men raise their heads, then fall again. Now the sun has come to earth. That's very modernist, facing up to the reality, the despair. Fast forward, REM, that's great, starts with an earthquake. It's on and on and on. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Wonderstuff, Eight-Legged Groove Machine, much underrated album. It's DEFCON 1, no time to run, no time to eat, no time to sleep. It's DEFCON 1. So give me Big Mac, give me fries to go. Chorus, Big Mac, fries to go. Give me Big Mac, give me fries to go. You can't face reality, so you laugh at it. Hope is all gone. And all we've got left is to amuse ourselves to death, as Postman put it. Now, interestingly, that's gone out the window again, because we're no longer incredulous towards every meta-narrative. There's one which seems to have taken hold of our cultures, and that's about climate crisis. You know, if there's one shared universal ethic, it's that we try not to destroy the planet. But if you talk to anyone who's serious about this stuff, the twist here is it's far too late. It's gone. Last year, global warming was above 1.5 degrees Celsius for the whole year, on average. That was the tipping point that had to be avoided because it would end everything. I've had a friend, not seen him in years actually, but he was an Anglican priest, and well, he never stopped being. It's an indelible character, but he'd left his parish and left working for the church, and was deeply involved in the the really committed end of environmental protests. He'd go and camp on the site of what was supposed to be the extra runway at Heathrow for months on end and things like this. And I remember saying to him once, Chris Sutherland his name was, I remember saying to Chris once, what as a priest do you bring there? And without even thinking, he said hope. He said, people are there because they think they have to be, because they think they have to do what they can, but none of them believe there's any chance it will make a difference. None of them have hope. As a priest, I can have hope. And this is not 18th century enlightened hope, that we will lift ourselves somehow out of the mess we are in. This is hope that however deep the mess gets, we know a God who can transform it. I write about evangelicalism from time to time. I'm happy enough to own the term if I'm not in America. But evangelicalism is a very enlightened movement. And it's a very hopeful movement. One of the questions that's running through Christian history in this period is hang on, there's a world out there, and there are massive, great civilizations in China and Japan and the Indian subcontinent. In China, at least, probably more technologically advanced than Europe, at least in the 16th century, 17th century, and they've never heard the gospel. What's going on there? How can we make sense of that? And you find a scandal of particularity is the term, and you find one response is a bunch of theologians trying to think about ways of talking, but the classic evangelical response is, well, let's get out there and let's convert them all by next Tuesday, and then there won't be a problem anymore. And there is something of that in Carey and Fuller and the birth of the Mission Society. There's a lot of that in Wesley. In a young Jonathan Edwards, there's a lot of that. He thinks the revival is the beginning of the great triumph of Christianity. As he gets older, he revises his opinion as people who he thought had been marvellously saved vote him out of his pastorate and stuff. When the world hoped, it was easy for Christians to hope, but it was too easy for us to hope wrong. When the world despairs, the only way we can hope is right. If anyone knows Mahler's Sixth Symphony, start humming the last movement. Okay. The last movement of Mahler's Sixth Symphony, I don't have it with me, but I have a great set of sleeve notes on the recording I've got. It ends with these 3 hammer blows, usually performed by getting an anvil, winching it up into the air and dropping it on a plate of iron in the auditorium. Mahler liked noise. There's a famous story of Marla going to the Canadian side of Niagara Falls and going down onto that viewing platform that used to be just right near where the water was hitting, and you can't hear a thing there because of the noise of the water, but he said something and someone lip read it, and apparently what he said was, fortissimo at last. And this liner note says, if Mahler had been Beethoven or Brahms or Bruckner or any of the other 19th century symphonists, the third hammer blow would not have fallen. He would have found some way of rescuing the possibility of hope and meaning at the end of the symphony. Beethoven 9, as it dissolves into something like chaos, suddenly we get the voice of the soloist. Friends, let us sing of joy. But Mahler won't do that. The last hammer blow falls. The symphony disintegrates. There's no meaning, no hope. What can you do instead? Only look to a God who can bring hope beyond the grave. Who heard the hammer blows as they nailed him to a tree. And rose from the grave on the third morning. Real hope is not based around our estimations of what we can do as a culture, not based around scientific possibilities, political transformations. Much of the world our politicians are doing us a great favour in making that abundantly clear to us just at the moment. Real hope is the knowledge that our God is in the business of turning death, of transforming what seems like inevitable and final defeat into triumph and victory. Most people wrote Henry David Thoreau in Walden. Most people live lives of quiet desperation. And despite the fact that Henry David Thoreau wrote it in Walden, I think that's probably true. Not a fan of Thoreau. Most people live lives of quiet desperation. Where is the hope? The young people in our world, seeing the predictions of how much worse it will get after we're dead, but before they are. The whole of our politics has been built on the promise that your children will have it better than you have. And for the first time in about 300 years, that promise is not looking credible just now. It didn't always come true, but it looked credible. Most people live lives of quiet desperation. we have the opportunity to hold out hope, not some despairing grasping after some sort of possible future. Not the sort of hope that sustained the Manchester United fan base over the last few years. I have a hard drive full of Man United jokes. I made the mistake of cracking some of them in Guildford, and without realising, of course, Guildford Cathedral is the spiritual home of the Man United fan base. Not grasping after some just about imaginable possibility, but knowing that precisely at the point when we cannot imagine any possibility that might work, God acts and transforms. I said to you this morning about Tompkins saying in 1620 it looked like it was over for the separatists, and it really did. And God acted, and God transformed. When we start telling the stories of missions, and yes, we need to do the post-colonial critiques, we need desperately to do the post-colonial critiques, but even though after that there are stories of heroic men and women who took themselves to places and suffered and went to the point where it seemed there was no imaginable way for the gospel to triumph. And God acted, and the possibilities were transformed. Real hope is hope in the God who raised Jesus from the dead, which means it's hope that knows that there are graves and suffering and crosses and looks beyond them to more than we can ever ask or imagine.